The invasion began abruptly. One moment, the sky were clear, and the next, they were overrun. People froze, peering up in terror as the dark, towering ships that seemed to absorb the light filled them. Massive craft hovered over every major city, causing the world to erupt in silence as governments frantically tried to react. Nonetheless, it was already too late, as the extraterrestrial danger had already started. These weren't the usual human invaders, had the misconception that they were harsh conquerors, rather than inquiring explorers or conciliatory diplomats. Strong and merciless, the initial onslaught of strikes arrived quickly. In a matter of minutes, military jets, tanks, and rockets reduced towns to rubble. It wasn't really a struggle. All the power of Earth's defense systems proved ineffective. It was a slaughter, and the tall, armored aliens in the sleek, metallic suits strolled around, their guns pulsed with energy, capable of destroying everything in their path as they moved easily through the ruins. Earth warriors, generals, commanders, and warriors were considered nothing more by the invaders, compared to ants, who were weak, pathetic, and they didn't even bother to interact directly. Battle. Why expend the energy? The invading force's formidable leader, a man known Commander Zorok's eyes flashed with a steely stare as he observed from the flagship. Blue light that he had led innumerable conquests across as he saw Earth's final stand. Earth in the galaxy was but one more unimportant planet on his list. In his remember, it was already over, and people had given up hope because of their outdated technology. Their fighters lacked toughness. This was merely another simple victory with no obstacles. One of the Zorvo subordinates said, "They're putting on quite a show," as they watched a fleet of Earth's fighter jets fly by. Tried to mount a counterattack. Zorok didn't even hesitate to allow them to state it in a robotic, emotionless voice. They'll find out as soon as projected that the alien ships, which traveled faster than the jets, would pick off the jets one by one, leaving them with no chance of survival. It was like attempting to sweat flies with a stone, unlike anything that humanity had ever seen. Meaningless. The tale was the same in New York, Tokyo, London, and Moscow, all across the world. The greatest cities in human history were collapsing, and entire armies were being destroyed by the invaders. Meticulous and exact, their goal was to completely eradicate humanity rather than merely vanquish it. The invaders were not just occupying the area, they were also seeking any sign of resistance. Thought nothing of the people or the resources on Earth. To them, the planet was merely a tactical outpost and a minor detail in their Zorro's great scheme for domination. Considered people as nothing more than transient hindrances and required to be made way for. Yet there was something unique about this planet that had captured the aliens' focus when scanning areas far below the surface, especially those close to an area that people refer to as Egypt. They had discovered an odd energy signature in was much older than anything they had previously come across on Earth. Yet Zorok rejected it, figuring it was probably merely a relic from a long-gone culture. Still, the bizarre that reading persisted in his thoughts, causing him to consider another subordinate. Commander stated that we have found an anomaly close to the Egyptian border. Should we examine? Zorok waved his hand dismissively, saying, "It's not important. Let's focus on the Earth. Will end when the cities demolish their infrastructure and break their spirit." The extraterrestrial troops proceeded with their march of destruction, just like everyone else, leaving nothing but ash and destruction in their wake. Following them, the terrified and desperate people attempted everything they could. Despite their greatest fighters and most advanced technologies, nothing worked. The world's armed forces were defeated in less than a day by the aliens because they were too powerful and had too advanced technology. Communications ceased, and the governments, once assured of their abilities to save their population, were now hidden in underground bunkers, covert safe rooms, and other futile. The fact that invaders may arrive anywhere at any time and cause more than simply physical damage was previously established. The psychological damage that the invaders hadn't even thought to cause was catastrophic. The people of Earth were unable to communicate, make requests, or engage in talks. Abandoned to speculate as to whether they would end up as slaves, wiped out, or just abandoned to perish in the wilderness on their own, Zorok observed the mayhem with a detached coldness. He had witnessed this, the desperation, and the numerous times before the panic were all so familiar. But every time the last hope was extinguished, there came a moment when the subjugated planet knew it was over. The only thing remaining was submission. Zorok had lived for that instant on Earth, but moment hadn't arrived yet. Yet despite insurmountable obstacles, people kept. Despite knowing they would lose, they persisted in their fight. By the end of the first day, nearly admirable. In a primitive kind of way, the majority of the globe was under the grip of extraterrestrial forces. The invasion was going precisely as Zorok had anticipated. He anticipated the remaining opposition crumble in a matter of hours. But something continues to nod toward him. The energy reading it was weird and relentless, unlike anything he had ever encountered, coming from Egypt. Prior to Zorok pushing it to the back, but it was still getting stronger for the time being. He had cities to take, armies to defeat, and a planet to claim in his thoughts. Egypt stayed put while the extraterrestrial troops dispersed around the world. Here, the ancient land appeared to have been waiting for the peaceful chaos that had overrun the rest of the planet. For something different, most people had missed the energy reading that the alien scanners had picked up on, although not by for days. The people who lived close to the pyramids whispered in whispers concerning weird occurrences, peculiar breezes, shifting sands, and whispers in the night. A small team of archaeologists was excavating beneath the surface, where something ancient and long forgotten was stirring. Despite having studied the pyramids for years, those who were closer to the Great Pyramid experienced it more keenly than others. Recently, far below any known chamber and deep below the desert, they had found something they couldn't explain. Tools have detected indications of a secret tomb that was not depicted on any map or documentation of the area. Itself appeared to be alive and waiting for one of the archaeologists, humming with an odd low vibration. An older man by the name of USF had devoted his life to deciphering Egypt's riddles, yet even he was unable to overcome the sense of disquiet had descended across the dig site. Something had changed from the old tales that had legends of a warrior, once told as myths around campfires. Suddenly felt all too real and unbeaten general from a time when the pharaohs started to speak and reappear. Talks the story told of a man who had previously kept Egypt safe from invaders so strong that even the gods shuddered. This famous and dreaded general who had been shackled in a tomb by his people, with spells so potent that not even death could free him. The old book claimed he was more than just a fighter. Shield endowed with enchantment derived from Egypt's sky and soil. They claimed that the spirit was kept hidden until the moment of greatest necessity. Something appeared to change as the extraterrestrial ships passed over Egypt. Down under the sands, where the tools of the archaeologist had found odd readings, the ancient when the tomb started to move, millennia's heavy, motionless air inside it was suddenly rippling with vitality. The mummy, securely encased in its linens, started to twitch. His body was bound by spells dating back hundreds of years, but they had not aged his skin. Gradually, the wrappings started to loosen and slide off the dry desert air, a long-forgotten person in the general's imagination that aroused his memories of bygone eras and lost kings were hazy. But one thing was evident: his goal when forces beyond of human control attacked Egypt. He had a duty to defend the country, and now had arrived for the power that had kept him asleep to burst into life. Filling his eyes closed for millennia suddenly burst open. Shining in his body, he rose slowly from the stone slab where he had rested, lit by an unearthly light. His former human body had evolved into a hybrid of flesh and magic, serving as a channel for the long-lost powers that had been sealed with him above the alien forces, who carried on their attack without realizing it. The earth itself appeared to change in reaction to the general's rising. The sands once, in contrast to the awakening below, still started to swirl, creating tiny whirlwinds about the grave as the temperature rose. Densely imbued with energy, as though the earth acknowledged its defender and was phoning him back to complete his task while he was still at the excavation site. Feeling the shift as well, he wasn't sure what was going on, but his mind was now consumed by the tales his ancestors had told. Was the legendary warrior really rising again, as the legends claimed? Could sense a force older than civilization reviving in his bones. The mummy moved slowly at first as his body adjusted to the outside world after centuries of immobility, but with each step movement, growing more conscious and powerful, his memory improved, enabling him to remember that his goal was evident from the fights he had waged, the invaders he had vanquished, and the power he had used. Protect Egypt from an adversary that is not of this world, like the money, once more. Proceeded into the dimly lit tomb, the electricity in the surrounding air crackling as ancient inscriptions etched onto the walls started to. The spells that had tied him were awakened by his presence and produced a glow, although they suddenly had a new function. They were enabling him to reach his greatest potential and release the magic that had been contained. While he was away, the extraterrestrial forces carried on their unnoticed attack on Earth. Of the old power rising beneath them, Egypt having been written off as irrelevant. A remnant of a vanished civilization, but they were unaware of what was about to the general, now completely conscious, emerged with his mummified body. He was no longer simply a man, as his old armor gleamed in the moonlight and now projected a mystical brilliance. The sand appeared to move, and the guy was a force of nature confined to the ground. The invaders would quickly discover that with him controlling the wind, they had scorned the weapons and efforts of humanity's warriors, laughed at them. But they had never encountered a fighter like this. The general was not just Egypt's guardian, but also the manifestation of its past, present, and future as he entered the darkness in the sky. The mummy realized his time had come, and that the invaders would pay Egypt as a guardian who was prepared to battle the world for undervaluing the might of the ancient land. The alien invaders had destroyed Earth's fortifications as if they were nothing, and every attempt to resist was met with ruins. The largest cities in human history were destroyed, and those who escaped were either in hiding or creating small resistance units. Despite the overwhelming odds against them, desperation gripped the world, causing most of the air communication connections to be cut. And even in the face of, nobody knew if there were still any strongholds. People kept fighting despite being confident of losing, since makeshift was all they had left. Resistance groups appeared using outdated weaponry and any resources they could garner. In Egypt, improvised materials and guerrilla taxes served as the group's lifelines. If fighters had sought sanctuary close to the pyramids, they were an eclectic group of troops, civilians, and everyone else prepared to carry a weapon, even though they knew they wouldn't last long. But they were resolved to make a statement because the alien invaders had written them off as irrelevant as well, captured by their arrogance to regard them as a danger. Commander Zorok had shifted his focus to more significant goals. Thinking Egypt would have minimal impact, his forces concentrated on the bigger cities, where they methodically eliminated any last pockets of opposition. But the smaller a group in Egypt had seen something that was outside the realm of old stories, which surprised the aliens. Word swiftly spread among the once disregarded as mythical tales of a protector emerging from the sands. Locals, some of the resistance fighters, didn't think the mummy was awake, believing it to be just one more desperate hope to hold on to during these difficult times. But others had seen the unusual changes in the sands, a sense of electricity in the air, and the reawakening of something ancient while the world was distracted following on the invaders. The extraterrestrial troops in Egypt started investigating the pyramids in search of relics and valuables to pillage, believing that Egypt's past was little more than the remnants of an ancient society, and the aliens relocated. They were on an archaeological hunt, groups of them using advanced scanners to search the pyramids for anything of value. Nothing more, and until the first extraterrestrial patrol, they had no reason to believe anything otherwise. Disappeared. A tiny party of invaders had gone inside a recently discovered tomb located out into the desert, not far from where the resistance fighters fled, leaving no trace or signal behind them the following day. The aliens' message was effective enough that they dispatched a second crew to look at the matter this time around. Made it escape with hardly a single survivor returning, his voice shaking. Shattered, he talked about an impossibility: a man cloaked in old linen had emerging from the tomb's depths and traveling more quickly than they had ever seen. The aliens waved it off as a bug or a malfunction in the soldier's suit, finding it incomprehensible that anything was going on that they couldn't comprehend. But soon more patrols started to vanish. The invaders encountered an adversary they were unable to locate or anticipate was retaliating. Resistance fighters were aware of what was going on, although they hadn't seen him. The mummy, the legendary ancient general, was alive directly. But they were familiar with the tales that had been passed down through the ages and were aware of the general's background. Egypt was formerly protected from invaders with more might than any human army, and today words of his apparent return to carry out the task swiftly spread among the opposition, but some were dubious. Others experienced a wave of hope. Perhaps they weren't as alone as they had assumed. Something had the potential to reverse the situation. The alien invaders, still unaware of the true threat, carried on with their operations, getting closer to the center of the pyramids. They continued to have faith in their technology supremacy, was still giggling at the notion that Earth's warriors could compete with them. But that assurance was about to be broken one evening. The alien station close to the pyramids encountered the mummies for the first time in person. A group of an advanced armored group equipped with energy weapons had surrounded the dig site they were in. Unaware of the danger beneath, the ground abruptly gave way as they prepared to delve deeper into the tomb. The ground shook all around them, and the sand suddenly moved violently, rising into the air. Before they could respond, the mummy's figure materialized like a live force, clad in aged armor and linen that appeared to glow in the night, His eyes blazed with a fire that penetrated the aliens launched their guns that night. Startling and unprepared, but it was futile. The mummy moved at an unnaturally fast pace, skillfully dodging their blows in an instant. As the sand surrounding him whirled into a maelstrom that the aliens were powerless to stop, he was among them with his hands uplifted. Their energy shields flickered and collapsed due to the old magic, leaving them clueless as the mummy tore through their ranks. Of what they were battling, it was an apparition or ghost that shouldn't have existed given how advanced their technology was. The alien squad was completely destroyed in a matter of minutes by the mummy's strength, and the few that remained powerful were rendered useless. Survived and were able to escape, but for the first time since when the invasion started, the alien armies were vanquished not by something ancient, something unstoppable, and something they didn't understand. The resistance fighters, who were observing from a distance, were taken aback. They had anticipated assistance, but hadn't anticipated this. For the first time in days, the aliens thought. Hope sparked in their hearts. Money was real, and he was fighting back. Despite not fully understanding the extent of the threat, they started to believe something was seriously wrong. Their newly delivered opponent rendered their technology, which had previously operated flawlessly against human forces, ineffective. Greater military units and patrols, but it didn't matter. Each time the mummy surfaced from the sands, his strength increasing with every interaction. For the extraterrestrial forces were on the defensive for the first time since the invasion started. They had laughed at humanity's warriors, making fun of their valiant attempts to fight, and had come to Earth expecting an easy victory. But now they faced an ancient force older than any of their previous encounters, something they had never experienced before. Worse, and even more hazardous, the aliens had misjudged Earth, and now Commander Zorok got reports of patrols disappearing strangely, and he grew increasingly frustrated. They were paying the price. Energy signatures and forces being eliminated in Egypt by an unidentified power. This wasn't intended. The conquering of Earth was meant to be swift and conclusive, but this was what he had to deal with: losses he was unable to explain, all of which originated in a single, unimportant area. His conceit had made him blind to the potential of any genuine threat, but he could no longer deny it because he was aware of it. There was a mummy that the troops were whispering about, and something had to be done about it. Zorok was unconcerned, even if his forces were superior in technology. Even if it seemed ridiculous to think that an old relic could really be dangerous, he couldn't afford to allow it to keep interfering with his objectives, therefore he would deal with it directly. Descended to Earth in his own ship, this time accompanied by his finest men. They reached the desert close to the pyramids, right in the middle of the sand disturbance, so there would be no mistakes. Changed beneath them, almost in response to their presence, as if the ground itself was alive. Zorok hardly noticed his focus. Was experiencing a burst of energy, unlike anything he had ever experienced while he was on the readings originating from the pyramids. As he readied his soldiers, a raw and ancient wave of energy changed the atmosphere. Zorok troops' reed rippled across the desert, making the ground quake a little with their firearms, but the leader maintained his composure because to his sophisticated armor and technology provided him such unwavering assurance that he thought nothing could compare to the power of his coldly. Zorok observed as the mummy surfaced from the shadows. Computation as the silhouette emerged in the distance. Encased in deteriorating linen and emitting a sinister glow, the mummy moved with determination, his eyes focused on the source of the disruption, the entity that had destroyed entire patrols. Zorvo troops fired an instant later, a stream of light that appeared to bend the sands about him, burning with ancient strength, energy illuminating the desert. But the mummy was too quick and too evasive, and the tools they had been using for so long to defend themselves against him were ineffective since the sands rose like a living wall. The mummy narrowed his eyes due to their onslaught. This was not your typical adversary, but there was still only one figure, so he turned on his own powerful weapon. He pointed a powerful energy cannon that could level huge skyscrapers in a single blast at the mummy and fired, certain that the battle would end quickly. But the mummy stood firm as the blast struck, but the old warrior absorbed the energy and power within him, increasing it in the air, rather than dissipating. Zorro's confidence wavered for the first time when the force surrounding the mummy intensified, crackling. This was not simply an ancient relic from Earth's history, rather. It was something completely different that defied reasoning and technology. With earnest, Zorok determined to demonstrate his superiority, unleashed all of his resources. His warriors launched a fierce assault, but the mummy retaliated. The sands themselves appeared to battle alongside him with lethal precision, swirling in enormous storms that the alien forces were confused and rendered blind. but Zoroark's advanced armor shielded him from the worst of it, but he sensed the pressure growing. So he changed strategies and used drones and advanced EXP explosives in an attempt to use firepower alone to overpower the mummy. But no matter what, Zoroark sensed that this wasn't only about the mummy that he flung at him. Strength from the ancient magic hidden in the sands. The mummy was pulling power from the land itself. It was a power Zoroark couldn't comprehend, something much older for millennia, and more profound than anything he had before faced. Zoroark recognized for the first time in his career that he was facing this wasn't just a physical fight, rather. It was a war of forces caused by something outside of his control. His cold, the mummy, was not merely defending a country, she was fighting an enemy that was elemental primal, using calculated technology. As a group of people, he was defending against something much older, the country itself, and the spirit of Egypt. The foreign commander was the unbeaten Zoroark, conqueror of the world, and would not tolerate defeat. Innumerable conflicts later, he charged the energy emanating from him in waves by activating his suit's maximum potential. Aimed straight at the mummy, intending to deliver one last, terrible blow, but the sands, which had once been solid, fell way beneath him as he closed in. Zoroark lost his footing and lost the mummy in a spinning abyss while maintaining his composure. The dexterity of a centuries-old warrior grasped the chance that he raised his palms, and the sandstone intensified, catching his attention as the air shimmered around him. He attempted to shoot again, but the storm swallowed him despite his strong armor being unable to keep him safe from the storm's force. For the first time, his eyesight became blurry as his suit systems failed. Felt a strange and unsettling apprehension, as he had never encountered an opponent like this. Was a force that was far more strong and ancient than anything that could be subdued by technology or physical force than he had ever imagined. Zoroark realized his error at that precise instant. He had misjudged the earth, and more significantly, the strength of its venerable guardians. It wasn't just about overcoming a warrior, this was a fight that had already been scribed in the sands by ancient times. When the storm roared around him and the invasion started, Zoroark realized he had lost his suit. Failed to make his weapons effective, the mummy moved in a silent, unyielding manner. Was only purpose, the leader once so sure of himself, without anger or hatred in his eyes. After his win, he had to acknowledge that not all conflicts could be won by force alone. Ultimately, it wasn't just. Even though Zoro's body was damaged, his will gave the mummy one more burst of strength. Triumphant over the extraterrestrial commander, the invaders, observing from a distance, understood their commander had fallen. The alien soldiers were rocked by Commander Zorvo's defeat, the one who had led them to numerous triumphs throughout the galaxy, but was now vanquished and overthrown by something they didn't recognize. That as panic spread among the remaining invaders, the likelihood of their conquest, which had appeared certain at first, was now dashed by the reports were inconsistent and confused when they came from Egypt. But one thing was certain, their technology was superior. After Zoroark defeated the rebel warriors, firepower had failed them. Humans swiftly learned about the mummy's victory in Egypt after discovering new strength. Individuals who had been on the verge of giving up started to rally, previously disjointed and discouraged. The resistance in other nations is now fighting with redoubled zeal. They realized that there was a chance, however slim, that they could truly defeat the extraterrestrial forces, who were now fighting to hold onto the planet in the absence of their master. Had never seen a circumstance such as this before. Thus their whole plan was based on overpowering power and fear, and the mummy's presence, though limited to Egypt, was diminishing for both of them now. Became a universal emblem of human resistance. His successes over the invaders went beyond the physical. Psychologically, the mummy fought on for days, walking purposefully through the desert with each stride. More formidable as the previous, the extraterrestrial forces send further soldiers in a vain attempt to retake the circumstance, but they suffered the same end as the rest, since their weapons were unable to cut through the enchantment that safeguarded the mummies. But their technology couldn't compete with the Earth's inherent power, which the invaders were being driven back by the mummy's influence, not only in Egypt, but even globally. Triumphs human resistance organizations organized strikes against alien supply routes and outposts formerly exuded such confidence, but now they were withdrawing, desperately clinging to what little land remained before the tide had turned. But even though the aliens were weaker, the mummy knew the battle was far from done. Were still a threat, since they had strong spacecraft and advanced technology, even without Zoroark, sufficient in power to inflict immense harm. The conflict involved more than just driving the invaders away. Fearing their complete removal from Earth, The mummy called upon the old magic of the region to prepare for one last encounter. He could feel the strength of the pyramids and the sand coursing through him, bolstering his determination that the invaders had misjudged the resilience of the earth and the relationship between the land when its inhabitants realized the link was breaking as the extraterrestrial forces moved again, getting ready for a last offensive, and the mummy moved, calling forth using all of his might, the sands of Egypt rising, whirling around him into a gigantic storm that engulfed the desert. Disoriented and unable to see through the storm, the aliens fired their weapons mindlessly. The mummy advanced, pushing past the barriers, weapons useless against the force of nature that had risen against them. Once confident of their victory, the invaders' figure was scarcely discernible through the swirling sands, resembling a storm. Now that the storm had grounded their ships, they confronted an adversary they couldn't defeat. The few soldiers still on the ground attempted to escape being torn apart by the overwhelming power of the magic that surrounded them. To escape, but they had nowhere to run. The sand ate them up, obliterating any memory of the mummy. Made it to the center of the alien forces, despite their presence in the mayhem, despite their last leaders. Desperate and terrified attempts to reorganize, it was too late since Egypt's power was too strong enough and too deep for technology to conquer on its own. As the storm ate up the alien ships, some of their systems failed. Even while the mummy had tremendous power, it was not limitless, and each encounter tired him. As the final alien ship crashed into the sands, victory came at a price. The mummy felt the pressure of his last act bearing down on his body. Sustained by the tomb's enchantment for a century, was starting to wane. He had done his duty and ascended to safeguard Egypt, to keep the country safe from those that would destroy it. Yet currently the magic that had kept him alive was evaporating and returning to the earth from which it had come. Time was running out. The storm started to subside, the sand returning to the calm. The surviving humans, those who had fought with the mummy and seen his power gathered around him in the desert. They could feel the fatigue and weight of decades of fighting in his eyes, and they knew without having to say anything that this was the mummy, who was once a renowned general, was making his last stand and coming back to the peace. With a final burst of energy, the mummy drove the last vestiges of the tomb from which he had been called. The extraterrestrial armies from Earth had vanished, along with their ships which had formerly ruled the skies. Earth was free, humanity had survived, and the invaders who had come to conquer were vanquished. But at a price. The mummy's body started to decompress as the last of the invaders were driven away. The sands of Egypt, which had once given him life, were about to crumble, claimed him once more, and those who observed realized they were seeing the conclusion of an era, the final act of a protector who, like the mummies, had battled for the survival of his people and their home rather than for glory. Vanished into the sands. And a calm descended upon the desert as the conflict was finished. But the warrior's legacy would endure because he had once again guarded Egypt, and even though he was no longer with us, his influence would endure.